My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 36 years old, and right now I'm sitting in the burgundy leather chair furthest from the mahogany conference table at Wellington Associates Law Firm on LaSalle Street in downtown Chicago. The morning sun filters through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the Persian rug beneath my worn flats. Everyone else arrived in sleek cars with drivers. I took the red line. But before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The reading of my grandfather Harold Mitchell's will was scheduled for 10 o'clock sharp, and the family has assembled like they're attending a board meeting they expect to dominate. My father Bob sits at the head of the table, his silver hair perfectly styled, wearing the same navy suit he reserves for important business dealings. Beside him, my mother Linda adjusts her string of pearls, the ones grandfather bought her for their 25th wedding anniversary. Her manicured fingers drum silently against her Hermes handbag. My younger brother Michael leans back in his chair with the casual confidence of someone who's never doubted his place in the world. At 32, he's already a senior vice president at Goldman Sachs, drives a Tesla Model S, and owns a penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan. His Armani tie costs more than my rent. When he glances in my direction, it's with the same expression you'd give a stray cat that wandered into a five-star restaurant. The family friend Victoria Ashford sits across from them, technically not family but might as well be given how often she appears at our gatherings. She owns half the art galleries in River North and has never missed an opportunity to remind everyone about her Harvard MBA. She's here because grandfather's will apparently includes provisions for the family foundation, which she helps manage. Her presence feels like salt in an already stinging wound. James Wellington, the estate attorney, shuffles through documents at the far end of the table. He's been the family lawyer for over 30 years, handled every major transaction for Mitchell Properties and Development, and knows exactly where every financial skeleton is buried. When he looks at me, there's something I can't quite read in his expression, pity maybe, or something else entirely. Nobody saved me a seat at the main table, that's fine. I've grown accustomed to being the afterthought, the family member they mention with tight smiles and quick subject changes. The granddaughter who couldn't live up to the Mitchell name, who walked away from Northwestern's business program, who never amounted to anything substantial. Today they expect my empty hands to remain empty. What my family doesn't know, what they've never bothered to ask, is why my grandfather called me every Tuesday for the last 8 years of his life. They don't know about the private conversations we shared over coffee at that little diner on Clark Street, away from the marble columns and crystal chandeliers of the family estate. They assume our relationship was nothing more than polite holiday exchanges and birthday cards with generic messages. The truth is more complicated than they could imagine, buried beneath years of carefully constructed appearances and deliberate misdirection. While they see failure where I stand, grandfather saw something different entirely. While they count my supposed shortcomings, he was counting something else altogether. The numbers they'll hear today will reshape everything they thought they knew about Harold Mitchell's final wishes, and more importantly, about me. I used to dream about working alongside my father and brother, about earning my place in the mahogany-paneled offices of Mitchell Properties and Development. Growing up, family dinners were strategic planning sessions disguised as casual conversation. Bob would discuss upcoming developments while carving the roast beef, explaining market analysis between passing the mashed potatoes. Michael absorbed every word like a sponge, asking insightful questions about commercial real estate trends and urban development strategies. I tried to keep up, tried to demonstrate the same natural aptitude for business that seemed to flow through Mitchell veins like genetic coding. At 16, I memorized property values across Chicago's Gold Coast. At 18, I could calculate return on investment faster than my classmates could balance their checkbooks. When Northwestern University accepted me into their prestigious business program, Bob actually smiled with genuine pride for the first time I could remember. My freshman year started exactly as planned: corporate finance, marketing strategy, business ethics. I maintained a 3.8 GPA while juggling internship applications and networking events. I joined the Business Women's Association, attended every guest lecture featuring successful entrepreneurs, and even landed a coveted summer internship at a downtown investment firm. Everything pointed toward a smooth transition into the family business upon graduation. But Northwestern wasn't just about business classes. The campus required general education credits, courses designed to broaden perspective beyond profit margins and market shares. I enrolled in contemporary social issues almost as an afterthought, something to fulfill requirements, while focusing on more important subjects. Professor Elena Rodriguez taught that class with the kind of passion that made you forget you were sitting in a lecture hall. She talked about economic inequality, not as abstract theory, but as mathematical reality affecting real families. She presented case studies about communities displaced by commercial development, about generational wealth gaps that no amount of individual effort could bridge. When she assigned our final project on corporate social responsibility, I chose to examine luxury hotel development in urban areas, partly because it connected to grandfather's business empire. The research opened doors I'd never considered. I interviewed families who'd been relocated to make room for high-end hotels. I studied employment data showing how luxury hospitality creates jobs, but rarely for the people who previously lived in those neighborhoods. I calculated the actual economic impact versus the projected community benefits that developers promised city councils. What I discovered made me physically nauseous. Mitchell Hotels, my grandfather's crown jewel, had been built on practices that prioritized profit over people in ways I'd never understood. Not illegal practices, but legal ones that felt morally bankrupt when you saw their human cost up close. Families paying 60% of their income for rent because luxury development had priced them out of affordable neighborhoods. Small businesses closing because foot traffic disappeared when their customers could no longer afford to live nearby. I brought my research home during spring break, expecting family discussion about how we might adjust our business practices to better serve the communities where we operated. I'd prepared recommendations for affordable housing partnerships, local hiring initiatives, and community investment programs that could maintain profitability while addressing social impact. Bob listened to my presentation over dinner, with the patience he'd show a child explaining an imaginary friend. When I finished, he set down his wine glass and smiled indulgently. "Sarah, business isn't a charity. We provide jobs, pay taxes, and improve property values. If we tried to solve every social problem, we'd go bankrupt trying to save people who won't save themselves." Michael nodded along, adding that successful businesses create opportunities for motivated individuals to improve their circumstances. "You can't help people who don't want to help themselves," he said, cutting his steak with surgical precision. "Our job is to run profitable companies, not subsidize poor decision-making." My mother simply patted my hand and suggested I might be spending too much time with liberal professors who didn't understand real-world economics. "It's sweet that you care."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
"Honey, but your father and grandfather built this business by making smart decisions, not emotional ones." I tried to explain that caring about community impact wasn't emotional decision-making, it was sustainable business strategy. I cited studies showing how companies with strong social responsibility outperformed competitors long-term. I presented data about consumer preferences shifting toward ethically minded brands. But they'd already dismissed my concerns as naive idealism, the kind of phase young people experience before learning how the world actually works. The conversation moved to Michael's latest promotion and his plans for purchasing investment property in Lincoln Park. I sat quietly, my research folder closed beside my untouched dessert, realizing that my family and I operated from fundamentally different definitions of success. The divide deepened over the following months. Every business conversation felt like speaking different languages. They discussed expansion strategies while I wondered about displacement impact. They celebrated rising property values while I calculated how many families could no longer afford to live in their childhood neighborhoods. We shared the same last name but increasingly felt like strangers occupying the same dining room. Grandfather noticed the change during one of our regular coffee meetings that summer. We'd been meeting monthly since I turned 18, informal conversations about family history and business philosophy that I'd always treasured. Usually, he'd share stories about building Mitchell hotels from a single downtown property into a regional empire. He'd talk about calculated risks and patient investment, about reading market trends and understanding customer psychology. That particular Tuesday in July, he asked why I seemed distracted. I hesitated, unsure whether he'd react like Bob or with genuine curiosity. Finally, I shared my research findings and the family's response. I expected him to defend the business practices that had created our wealth, to explain why community impact was secondary to shareholder returns. Instead, Harold Mitchell listened without interrupting. When I finished, he stared out the diner window for a long moment, watching pedestrians navigate the afternoon heat. "You know," he said, "finally your grandmother used to ask me similar questions. Margaret worried that our success was coming at other people's expense. I told her the same things your father told you." He paused, stirring his coffee absently. "She died before I realized she was right about some things. Money without purpose is just paper. Success without meaning is just scorecard keeping." That conversation changed everything. Over the next 2 years, Grandfather and I met every Tuesday at that same diner. He talked about regrets he'd never shared with Bob or Michael, about business decisions that had enriched the family while impoverishing communities. He'd spent decades justifying profit-first thinking, but age had given him perspective, that success felt hollow when it required ignoring suffering you could prevent. He'd been quietly researching social impact investing, studying companies that balanced profitability with community benefit. He'd identified opportunities to retrofit Mitchell hotels with local hiring programs, affordable housing partnerships, and community development initiatives. The financial projections showed these changes wouldn't reduce profitability, they'd actually increase it by building brand loyalty and reducing regulatory resistance. But when he'd mentioned these ideas to Bob and Michael, they'd reacted exactly as they'd reacted to my research. Business wasn't charity. Profit was purpose. Social responsibility was marketing, not strategy. So Grandfather began developing a different plan, one that wouldn't require convincing family members who viewed compassion as weakness. He started drafting legal documents that would ensure Mitchell Wealth could fund the kind of community-focused business practices he'd come to believe were both morally necessary and financially superior. During our Tuesday meetings, he'd show me investment proposals for companies doing exactly what I'd suggested. Affordable housing developers earning 15% returns. Local hiring programs that reduce training costs while building customer loyalty. Community investment initiatives that qualified for tax incentives while generating positive publicity. The future belongs to businesses that understand profit and purpose, aren't opposing forces, he'd say, pointing to financial projections that supported his thesis. Your research proved what I'd suspected, but been too stubborn to admit. We can make more money by making life better for the people around us. He asked me to help him research these opportunities, to build the same kind of detailed analysis I'd presented at that disastrous family dinner. But this research would remain between us, at least until he'd positioned everything properly. Bob and Michael would never voluntarily shift towards social impact investing, but they might accept it if presented as the smartest financial strategy rather than moral obligation. For 18 months, I lived a double life. Officially, I was the disappointing granddaughter who'd chosen an impractical academic path over family business success. I'd withdrawn from Northwestern's business program after my junior year, claiming the coursework felt irrelevant to my interests. My family interpreted this as confirmation that I lacked the discipline required for serious career pursuits. Unofficially, I was conducting the most thorough market research of my life. Grandfather provided funding for travel to study successful social impact businesses across the Midwest. I interviewed executives who'd implemented community-focused strategies, analyzed their financial performance, and documented best practices that could apply to Mitchell hotels. The work was exhilarating in ways that traditional business classes had never been. Instead of theoretical case studies, I was examining real companies solving actual problems while generating substantial returns. Instead of memorizing formulas, I was calculating how social responsibility could increase profitability through reduced turnover, improved community relations, and enhanced brand reputation. Every Tuesday, Grandfather and I would review my findings over coffee and pie. He'd ask detailed questions about implementation costs, regulatory requirements, and potential resistance from existing management. His business instincts remained sharp despite his advanced age, and he could identify weaknesses in proposals that I'd missed. More importantly, he'd share stories about the early days of Mitchell Hotels, when he'd prioritized rapid expansion over community consideration. He'd describe neighborhoods that had thrived before luxury development changed their character, families who'd been displaced by rising property values that followed hotel construction. I told myself we were improving these areas, he'd say, his voice heavy with regret. Rising property values meant prosperity, right? More jobs meant opportunity. But I never asked whether the people who lived there could access those jobs or afford those rising rents. These conversations taught me that business success without social consciousness was incomplete success, profitable but ultimately unsatisfying. Grandfather had spent 50 years building wealth that his family could enjoy for generations, but he'd never asked whether that wealth creation had prevented other families from building their own security. The research I was conducting offered a different path forward, one that could generate comparable financial returns while creating positive community impact. Social impact investing wasn't charity disguised as business, it was business strategy that recognized community health as essential to long-term profitability. But convincing Bob and Michael would require more than research and good intentions. It would require positioning social responsibility as the most profitable available strategy, not as moral obligation that might reduce returns. Grandfather understood this challenge and was developing a solution that wouldn't depend on their voluntary cooperation. 3 months before he died, Grandfather revealed the scope of his planning. He'd been working with estate attorneys to restructure his will in ways that would ensure Mitchell Wealth funded community-focused business practices, regardless of family resistance. The legal framework was complex, involving trusts and foundations that would control significant portions of the inheritance, while directing those funds toward social impact investments. Your research gave me the roadmap, he explained, during our final Tuesday meeting. Now I need to make sure that roadmap gets followed even after I'm gone. He'd been battling lung cancer for 6 months, a diagnosis he'd kept private while finalizing these legal arrangements. The family knew he was ill, but didn't understand how limited his remaining time had become. He'd chosen not to share the severity of his condition, partly to avoid premature inheritance discussions, and partly to complete his estate planning without external pressure. The will he'd drafted would surprise everyone, especially the provisions that recognized my research and granted me authority over substantial funds dedicated to social impact investing. Bob and Michael would inherit significant wealth, but much of it would be structured to encourage community-focused business practices, rather than pure profit maximization. They'll be furious at first, Grandfather admitted, his voice weaker than it had been just weeks earlier. But they'll come to understand that this approach will make them more money in the long run, not less. Harold Mitchell passed away on a Tuesday evening in November, exactly 8 years after our coffee meetings had begun. I received the call from Linda while sitting in my cramped Lincoln Park apartment, surrounded by research files that documented everything Grandfather and I had discussed over those precious weekly conversations. The irony wasn't lost on me that he died on our designated day, as if he'd planned even that detail with characteristic precision. The funeral drew hundreds of people to Fourth Presbyterian Church on Michigan Avenue, business associates, hotel industry executives, City officials and society figures filled every pew to pay respects to a man they remembered as a shrewd entrepreneur who'd built an empire from modest beginnings. Bob delivered a eulogy that focused on grandfather's business acumen and his role as a patriarch who'd provided financial security for generations of Mitchell descendants. Michael spoke about Harold's mentorship and the valuable lessons he'd taught about strategic thinking and calculated risk-taking. He shared anecdotes about grandfather's ability to identify profitable opportunities that others had overlooked, his patience in developing long-term investments, and his unwavering commitment to family prosperity. I sat in the third row between Victoria Ashford and my Aunt Caroline, listening to speeches that described a man I barely recognized. They talked about his ruthless negotiation skills, his talent for maximizing property values, and his genius for creating luxury experiences that commanded premium pricing. Nobody mentioned his growing concerns about social impact or his evolving perspective on business responsibility. The man they eulogized was the Harold Mitchell from decades past, before our Tuesday conversations had revealed his deeper reflections about legacy and purpose. They celebrated the grandfather who'd built Mitchell hotels through aggressive expansion and profit optimization, not the man who'd spent his final years questioning whether true success required broader community consideration. After the service, mourners gathered at the Drake Hotel for a reception that felt more like a business networking event than a memorial celebration. Real estate developers discussed potential collaborations while sampling catered appetizers. Hotel industry executives shared market predictions over premium whiskey. City council members mingled with construction contractors who'd worked on Mitchell properties throughout the decades. Bob moved through the crowd like a politician, accepting condolences while simultaneously discussing business continuity plans. He'd already assumed control of Mitchell properties and development, seamlessly transitioning into the leadership role he'd been preparing for his entire career. Michael stood beside him, fielding questions about the company's future direction with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted his inheritance. I spent most of the reception near the windows, overlooking Lake Michigan, watching November waves crash against Oak Street Beach, while family friends offered perfunctory sympathy about my loss. Their condolences felt hollow because they had no understanding of what grandfather and I had actually shared during those final years. They knew about the weekly coffee meetings, but assumed they were courtesy visits to keep a lonely old man company. Victoria Ashford approached me during the reception's final hour, her expression mixing pity with barely concealed judgment. She'd appointed herself unofficial family advisor since grandfather's death, offering unsolicited opinions about everything from funeral arrangements to business transition plans. "Sarah, I hope you understand that your grandfather's death changes things for you," she said, her voice carrying the patronizing tone she reserved for conversations about unpleasant necessities. "Harold was generous about including you in family activities, but Bob and Michael have real responsibilities now. You might want to consider finding more stable employment than whatever consulting work you've been doing." Her words stung not because they were cruel, but because they reflected how completely my family misunderstood my relationship with grandfather and my current circumstances. They viewed me as a charity case who'd been humored by a generous patriarch, someone who'd need guidance, adjusting to reduced family support after his passing. What Victoria didn't know, what none of them suspected, was that my so-called consulting work involved managing investment portfolios worth millions of dollars. The research grandfather and I had conducted together hadn't been academic exercises, it had been practical preparation for implementing social impact strategies that were already generating substantial returns. During our final months together, grandfather had transferred significant funds into accounts that I managed under carefully structured legal arrangements. He'd wanted to test the investment strategies we'd identified before committing larger portions of his estate to similar approaches. The results had exceeded our most optimistic projections. Affordable housing development in Milwaukee was generating 18% annual returns while providing quality homes for families earning moderate incomes. A local hiring program at 3 Mitchell hotels had reduced training costs by 30% while improving customer service ratings significantly. Community investment initiatives in Detroit and Cleveland had qualified for substantial tax incentives while building brand loyalty that translated directly into increased occupancy rates. These weren't experimental social programs, disguised as investments, they were profitable business strategies that happened to create positive community impact. Grandfather had been right about the financial potential of socially responsible business practices, and our Tuesday meetings had produced a roadmap for scaling these approaches across the entire Mitchell Hotel's portfolio. But explaining this to Victoria would require revealing information that needed to remain confidential until the will reading. Grandfather's estate planning had been deliberately complex, involving multiple trusts and foundations that would control different aspects of his wealth distribution. The family expected straightforward inheritance allocations based on traditional patriarch-to-heir transfer patterns. They had no idea that Harold Mitchell had spent his final years restructuring his entire estate around social impact principles that would fundamentally change how Mitchell wealth was managed and deployed. The legal documents, waiting in James Wellington's office, would surprise everyone, especially the provisions that recognized my research and granted me authority over investments worth tens of millions of dollars. So I simply nodded at Victoria's advice about finding stable employment, thanked her for her concern, and continued watching Lake Michigan waves, while counting the days until truth would finally replace assumption. The will reading was scheduled for the following Friday, exactly 1 week after Grandfather's funeral. 7 more days of being treated like the family disappointment, who needed career guidance and financial support. 7 more days before they learned that the quiet granddaughter they dismissed as an academic failure had been selected to oversee the largest charitable foundation in Mitchell family history, with full authority to implement the social impact strategies that Grandfather and I had developed together. The week between Grandfather's funeral and the will reading passed like a strange suspension of reality. I went through the motions of normal life, while carrying knowledge that would soon reshape everything my family understood about Harold Mitchell's final wishes. Every interaction felt weighted with approaching revelation, every casual conversation loaded with dramatic irony that made ordinary exchanges feel surreal. Bob called twice to discuss practical matters related to Grandfather's death. Death certificates, insurance policies, and administrative details that required family coordination. During these conversations, he spoke to me with the patient kindness reserved for relatives who needed extra explanation about complex matters. He assumed I'd never dealt with estate issues before, and carefully explained concepts like probate and asset valuation as if I were a confused child. What he didn't know was that I'd been helping Grandfather navigate similar complexities for months. The estate planning we'd worked on together involved trust structures and foundation management that made typical inheritance distribution look simple by comparison. I understood tax implications and legal frameworks that Bob had never encountered because traditional wealth transfer didn't require the specialized knowledge that social impact investing demanded. Michael stopped by my apartment Wednesday evening, ostensibly to check on my emotional well-being, but actually to discuss my financial future with characteristic Mitchell directness. He brought takeout from an expensive River North restaurant and opened a bottle of wine that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. "Sarah, we need to talk about your situation," he said after we'd finished eating, his tone shifting into business mode. "Grandfather's gone, and you need to start thinking practically about supporting yourself. Dad and I have been discussing ways to help you transition into something more stable than freelance consulting." He'd prepared what amounted to a career intervention, complete with job listings he'd printed from various employment websites. Administrative assistant positions at Mitchell Properties and Development. Entry-level marketing roles at companies where family connections could secure interviews. Reception work at law firms where Bob had professional relationships. The job descriptions represented the kind of work my family considered appropriate for someone with my educational background and demonstrated career trajectory. Nothing that required advanced skills or significant responsibility. Nothing that suggested they viewed me as capable of managing complex projects or making important decisions. "I appreciate the thought," I said, reviewing the printouts with genuine gratitude for his intentions if not his assumptions. "But I'm actually doing well with my current work. The projects I'm managing are more substantial than they might appear. Michael's expression mixed skepticism with brotherly concern. Sarah, whatever you're doing, it can't be providing real financial security. You live in a studio apartment and take public transportation. That's not sustainable long-term, especially now that grandfather isn't around to help with occasional expenses. His words revealed how completely he misunderstood my circumstances. The modest lifestyle I maintained wasn't evidence of financial struggle. It was deliberate choice that allowed me to focus on work I found meaningful rather than accumulating material possessions that didn't interest me. The investment income I earned from managing grandfather's social impact portfolios could have funded a much more expensive lifestyle, but luxury consumption had never appealed to me. More importantly, the substantial salary I received for managing these investments was deposited into accounts that my family knew nothing about. Grandfather had insisted on maintaining complete confidentiality about our business relationship until after his death, partly to avoid premature inheritance discussions and partly to protect the work we were doing from family interference. I understand your concern, I told Michael, but I'm more financially stable than you realize. The consulting work I do pays better than it might look from the outside. He smiled indulgently, the expression older siblings use when younger ones make claims about imaginary achievements. Sarah, if you were earning real money, you'd be living somewhere nicer than Lincoln Park. You'd have a car instead of taking the red line everywhere. You don't have to pretend with me. The conversation continued for another hour, with Michael offering practical advice about interview preparation and professional networking while I provided vague reassurances about my ability to manage my own career decisions. Eventually, he left with the satisfied expression of someone who'd fulfilled his family obligations by attempting to guide a wayward relative toward more responsible choices. Thursday brought similar interactions with Linda, who called to discuss my emotional adjustment to grandfather's death while subtly probing about my financial circumstances. She'd always worried about my unconventional choices, and grandfather's passing had intensified her maternal concern about my ability to navigate adult responsibilities without family guidance. "Sweetheart, I know you valued your time with grandfather, but you can't let grief interfere with practical planning," she said, during our phone conversation. "You're 36 years old, and you need to start building real career security instead of floating between temporary projects." Her advice came from genuine love and concern, which made it more painful than Michael's business-focused intervention. Linda had spent decades watching me make choices that seemed to prioritize principle over prosperity, and she'd concluded that my idealism was preventing me from achieving the kind of conventional success that Mitchell family members were expected to pursue. She didn't understand that the work I'd been doing with grandfather represented exactly the kind of career security she wanted me to find. Social impact investing was a rapidly growing field that demanded exactly the skills I'd developed through my Northwestern research and 18 months of portfolio management experience. The foundation I would soon oversee would provide professional opportunities that traditional business careers couldn't match. But explaining this would require revealing information that needed to wait until Friday's will reading. So I listened to her motherly advice about networking and professional development while mentally counting hours until truth could finally replace speculation about my circumstances and capabilities. The anticipation was becoming almost unbearable. For 18 months, I'd been living with knowledge that would fundamentally change how my family understood Harold Mitchell's values and priorities. I'd been carrying the weight of his evolving perspective on business responsibility while watching them celebrate the profit-focused approaches he'd actually come to question. Every family interaction felt like participating in an elaborate misunderstanding that would soon be corrected by legal documents waiting in James Wellington's office. Every piece of advice about my career and finances was based on assumptions that would prove completely inaccurate when they learned about the foundation grandfather had established and the authority he'd granted me to implement our shared vision. Friday morning arrived with December snow dusting Michigan Avenue as I made my way toward Wellington and Associates for the 10 o'clock will reading. I'd chosen my clothing carefully, a conservative black dress that looked professional without appearing expensive, minimal jewelry, understated makeup that suggested respectful mourning rather than celebration or expectation. The goal was to look exactly like what my family expected, the grieving granddaughter who'd appreciated her relationship with Harold Mitchell, but harbored no illusions about inheriting anything substantial. Someone who attended the will reading out of respect and curiosity rather than anticipation of life-changing revelation. As I approached the building where everything would finally be revealed, I felt the same mixture of nervousness and anticipation that had characterized those final months with grandfather. We'd planned this moment carefully, structuring his estate in ways that would ensure his evolving values became permanent family legacy rather than temporary individual sentiment. The foundation he'd established would control $47 million dedicated specifically to social impact investing. The legal framework he'd created would require Mitchell hotels to implement community-focused business practices or forfeit substantial portions of their inheritance. The research I'd conducted would become the operational blueprint for investment strategies that balanced profitability with social responsibility. Most importantly, the authority he'd granted me to oversee these initiatives would transform me from family disappointment into foundation director with fiduciary responsibility for more money than Bob and Michael had ever personally controlled. The quiet granddaughter they'd dismissed as an academic failure would soon be revealed as the family member grandfather had trusted most completely with his final wishes. I paused outside Wellington Associates, watching snow fall against the windows where my family was already gathered for the reading that would change everything they thought they knew about Harold Mitchell and about me. In a few minutes, empty hands would be revealed as carefully concealed full ones, and the Mitchell family would never be the same. The conference room at Wellington Associates felt smaller than I remembered from previous visits with grandfather during his estate planning process. Rich mahogany paneling reflected the gray December light filtering through tall windows overlooking LaSalle Street. James Wellington had arranged the seating deliberately, placing family members according to their expected inheritance significance. Bob commanded the head position, Linda to his right, Michael beside her. Victoria Ashford occupied the chair nearest the door, positioned to observe rather than participate directly. I settled into the remaining seat, furthest from the attorney's desk, exactly where someone with minimal expectations would naturally gravitate. The leather chair creaked softly as I adjusted my position, the sound seeming louder than it should in the heavy silence that had descended over the room. Everyone appeared to be holding their breath, waiting for confirmation of assumptions they'd carried since grandfather's death. James Wellington looked older than I remembered, his silver hair thinner, his hands less steady as he arranged documents across the polished conference table. He'd been Harold Mitchell's attorney for 3 decades, had structured every major business transaction, and knew family dynamics as intimately as he understood legal precedents. When his eyes met mine across the room, I caught a flicker of something that might have been anticipation or possibly apprehension. "Before we begin," Wellington said, his voice carrying the formal gravity that significant legal proceedings demanded, "I want everyone to understand that Harold Mitchell's final will reflects decisions he made carefully over several years. He revised these documents multiple times, consulting with additional legal specialists to ensure his wishes would be executed exactly as intended." Bob nodded impatiently, adjusting his tie with the unconscious gesture he made when eager to move past preliminaries toward substantive discussion. "Jim, we appreciate the thoroughness, but we're ready to hear the specific provisions." Harold was always clear about his intentions regarding family inheritance. Wellington's expression suggested that Bob's confidence might be premature, but he simply opened the primary document and began reading in the measured cadence that lawyers use for formal declarations. "I, Harold James Mitchell, being of sound mind and body, hereby declare this to be my last will and testament, revoking all previous wills and codicils." The opening paragraphs covered standard legal language about funeral arrangements, debt settlement, and administrative procedures. Wellington read these sections quickly, knowing that everyone was waiting for the inheritance allocations that would determine their financial futures. The preliminary provisions confirmed that grandfather's estate was valued at approximately $87 million, a figure that made Linda gasp softly despite her attempts to maintain composure. To my son Robert Mitchell, Wellington continued, I leave the family residence in Lake Forest, including all furnishings and personal property therein, along with a cash bequest of $2 million and my complete collection of rare books, which I trust he will preserve for future generations. Bob's face showed satisfaction mixed with slight surprise. The house alone was worth several million, and the rare book collection contained first editions that could fund a comfortable retirement. But the cash amount seemed modest compared to the estate's total value, suggesting that larger bequests were still forthcoming. To my grandson Michael Mitchell, Wellington read, I leave my vintage automobile collection, including the 1967 Shelby Cobra and 1955 Mercedes 300 SL Gullwing, along with a cash bequest of $2 million and full ownership of the Mitchell Properties and Development Offices building on Wacker Drive. Michael's eyes widened at the mention of specific vehicles he'd admired since childhood, classic cars worth hundreds of thousands of dollars that represented both financial value and sentimental connection. The office building represented substantial ongoing income through rental agreements with various tenants, making his inheritance both immediately valuable and perpetually profitable. To Victoria Ashford, Wellington continued, acknowledging her presence in the room, I leave $50,000 in recognition of her friendship and her service to the Mitchell Family Foundation, which she has managed with dedication and integrity. Victoria inclined her head gracefully, her expression suggesting she'd expected this modest bequest and was grateful for the recognition rather than the amount. $50,000 was generous for a family friend, but confirmed her peripheral status and Harold Mitchell's primary inheritance considerations. Wellington paused, shuffling through several pages of legal documentation before locating the section that would address the elephant in the room, what happened to the remaining $79 million that hadn't yet been allocated. Everyone leaned forward slightly, waiting for revelation of the primary inheritance that would determine the Mitchell family's financial future. The remainder of my estate, Wellington read slowly, totaling approximately $79 million, I leave in trust for the establishment and operation of the Mitchell Community Impact Foundation, dedicated to social impact investing and community development initiatives throughout the Midwest region. The silence that followed was so complete that I could hear the heating system cycling through the building's ventilation ducts. Bob's face went through several color changes as he processed what he'd just heard. Linda's hand flew to her throat, fingers automatically reaching for the pearl necklace that grandfather had given her decades earlier. Michael sat perfectly still, his expression frozen between confusion and disbelief. Furthermore, Wellington continued, his voice gaining strength as he moved through the document's most crucial provisions, I hereby appoint my granddaughter Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell as Executive Director of the Mitchell Community Impact Foundation, with full fiduciary authority over all foundation assets and complete discretion regarding investment strategies and charitable initiatives. Victoria Ashford's mouth fell open slightly, the first crack in her typically composed demeanor. She turned to stare at me with undisguised shock, clearly struggling to reconcile the quiet family disappointment she thought she knew with the person Harold Mitchell had entrusted with tens of millions of dollars. Bob found his voice first, though it emerged as a hoarse whisper rather than his usual commanding tone. Jim, there has to be some mistake. Harold would never leave the bulk of his estate to a foundation. He built Mitchell Properties for his family, not for strangers. Wellington met Bob's stare steadily, his expression professionally neutral, despite the emotional chaos erupting around the conference table. Robert, I can assure you there's no mistake. Your father revised this will 6 times over the past 2 years, consulting with specialists in foundation law and tax implications. Every provision was carefully considered and deliberately crafted. But Sarah, Linda said, her voice rising with panic and confusion, she doesn't know anything about managing money, she's never held a real job, never demonstrated any business sense. Harold can't have intended to give her control over $79 million. The irony of Linda's protest was almost painful. She was describing exactly the person my family believed me to be, while simultaneously rejecting the possibility that Harold Mitchell might have seen something different. Their shock wasn't just about the money, it was about discovering that grandfather's assessment of my capabilities differed drastically from their own. Wellington consulted his notes before responding to Linda's concerns. Mrs. Mitchell, your father-in-law was quite specific about his reasoning. The will includes a detailed explanation of his decision-making process, which I'll read if you'd like to hear his own words. Yes, Bob said immediately, his business instincts overriding his emotional response. Read exactly what Harold wrote. I want to understand how he reached these decisions. I have observed my granddaughter Sarah's dedication to research and analysis over the past several years. Her academic work at Northwestern University demonstrated exceptional insight into the intersection of business strategy and social responsibility. Bob interrupted impatiently. Academic work. She dropped out of Northwestern. She never completed her degree. Actually, Wellington said, consulting additional documents, according to university records provided to this office, Sarah Mitchell completed her Bachelor of Science in Business Administration, with a concentration in Sustainable Enterprise, graduating magna cum laude in May of 2019. The silence that greeted this revelation was even deeper than before. I'd never corrected my family's assumption that I'd dropped out of Northwestern because grandfather had asked me to maintain confidentiality about my continued education while we worked together on foundation planning. My degree had been earned through independent study and distance learning that allowed me to conduct research while managing investment portfolios. That's impossible, Michael said, his voice tight with confusion. Sarah told us she'd left Northwestern because the coursework didn't interest her. Wellington glanced at me briefly before continuing. According to the documentation in this file, Sarah Mitchell has been employed as a senior research analyst for Mitchell Strategic Consulting since 2019, with primary responsibility for evaluating social impact investment opportunities. The truth was emerging in pieces, each revelation forcing my family to reconsider assumptions they'd held for years. Mitchell Strategic Consulting was the company grandfather had established to manage his evolving investment strategy, with offices in Chicago and Milwaukee that handled portfolios worth millions of dollars. My supposed freelance consulting work had actually been full-time employment managing money on grandfather's behalf. Harold's personal statement continues, Wellington said, returning to the will document. Over the past 4 years, Sarah has demonstrated exceptional competency in identifying profitable investments that create positive community impact. Her research has generated returns exceeding market averages while funding affordable housing, local employment, and community development initiatives. Bob was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before, something between shock and grudging respect. Sarah, is this true? Have you been working for Harold all this time? I nodded slowly, meeting his gaze directly for the first time during the entire will reading. Grandfather hired me after I completed my research on social impact investing. We've been working together to develop investment strategies that balance profitability with community benefit. But why didn't you tell us? Linda asked, her voice mixing hurt with confusion. Why let us think you were struggling financially when you had a real job with real responsibilities? The question cut to the heart of the deception that had defined my relationship with family for the past 4 years. Grandfather had insisted on maintaining complete confidentiality about our business relationship, partly to protect the work from family interference, and partly to allow him to observe their genuine reactions to my supposed failures. Grandfather asked me to keep the work confidential while he made decisions about his estate. I explained, he wanted to see how different investment approaches performed before committing his entire inheritance to similar strategies. Wellington interrupted our family discussion to continue reading from Harold Mitchell's personal statement. I have watched my family's reaction to Sarah's supposed career struggles with disappointment and concern. Their inability to recognize her intelligence and capabilities has convinced me that traditional inheritance distribution would not serve my legacy appropriately. The words hung in the air like an indictment of family dynamics that nobody had previously acknowledged. Harold Mitchell hadn't just been leaving money to the granddaughter he considered most capable, he'd been making a statement about his family's failure to recognize and support that capability. Furthermore, Wellington continued, Sarah's commitment to using business success for community benefit represents the values I wish the Mitchell family legacy to embody. Traditional profit maximization has provided our family with substantial wealth, but sustainable prosperity requires broader consideration of social impact. Michael leaned back in his chair, his expression cycling through emotions I couldn't quite identify. So grandfather didn't just leave Sarah the money, he left her the money because he disagreed with how we do business. Wellington nodded confirmation. The foundation's charter specifically requires investment strategies that meet both financial return thresholds and community impact criteria. Traditional Mitchell properties and development practices would not qualify for foundation funding unless modified to include social responsibility components. The implications were becoming clear to everyone in the room. Harold Mitchell hadn't just redistributed his wealth, he'd used his inheritance to force his family to choose between maintaining current business practices or accessing foundation resources that could dramatically expand their operations. However, Wellington added, the will includes provisions for Bob and Michael to qualify for additional inheritance by demonstrating commitment to social impact business practices. Successful implementation of community-focused initiatives could result in substantial performance bonuses from foundation assets. Bob straightened in his chair, his business instincts recognizing opportunity despite his emotional confusion. What kind of performance bonuses are we talking about? Wellington consulted the relevant section of the document. Up to $10 million each, contingent on measurable community impact achievements and financial performance standards that Sarah will evaluate based on criteria established in the foundation charter. The room's atmosphere shifted as Bob and Michael began calculating possibilities rather than mourning losses. $20 million in potential additional inheritance represented substantial motivation to reconsider business practices they'd previously viewed as unnecessarily complicated. The foundation charter, Wellington explained, requires all investments to meet environmental sustainability standards, local hiring benchmarks, affordable housing provisions, and community development criteria. Sarah has full authority to determine whether proposed projects satisfy these requirements. Victoria Ashford had been listening with growing amazement, her expression suggesting she was witnessing a complete transformation of everything she thought she understood about Mitchell family dynamics. Sarah, she said slowly, you'll be controlling more money than most Fortune 500 CEOs manage. The observation was accurate but incomplete. The foundation represented more than financial control, it embodied Harold Mitchell's evolving understanding of successful business practices and his commitment to ensuring that Mitchell wealth served purposes beyond family enrichment. The foundation's mission, I said, speaking directly to my family for the first time since Wellington had begun reading the will, is to prove that social responsibility and financial success aren't competing objectives. Grandfather believed we could make more money by making life better for the communities where we operate. Bob was studying me with the focused attention he typically reserved for complex business negotiations. Sarah, do you really believe these social impact investments can generate returns comparable to traditional development strategies? The question represented the first time any family member had asked for my professional opinion, rather than offering advice about my supposed career deficiencies. The portfolios I've been managing for grandfather have averaged 18% annual returns over the past 4 years, while creating affordable housing for over 300 families and generating employment for more than 800 people. Michael's eyes widened at the financial figures, his training as an investment banker allowing him to immediately recognize the significance of consistent 18% returns in current market conditions. Those numbers are better than most hedge funds achieve. Wellington reached for another document, one that contained detailed financial reports documenting the performance of investments I'd managed on grandfather's behalf. Sarah's track record speaks for itself. The foundation begins operations with a portfolio that has consistently outperformed market averages while achieving measurable social impact. Bob extended his hand across the conference table, not as a father offering sympathy to a struggling daughter, but as a business professional acknowledging a colleague's demonstrated competency. Sarah, I owe you an apology. We clearly didn't understand what you've been accomplishing. I shook his hand, feeling decades of misunderstanding beginning to dissolve in the wake of legal documents that had finally revealed truth my family hadn't been allowed to know. Grandfather wanted to make sure the foundation was positioned for success before announcing his intentions. The secrecy was his decision, not mine. Linda was crying softly, tears mixing relief with regret as she processed the revelation that her daughter hadn't been struggling but had actually been building exactly the kind of successful career she'd always wanted me to pursue. "Sweetheart, I'm so sorry we didn't trust you to know what you were doing." The apology meant more than any amount of inheritance could have provided. For 4 years, I'd carried the weight of their disappointment, while knowing I couldn't defend myself without violating grandfather's confidentiality requirements. Their newfound respect felt like sunlight after years of shadow, but the most important conversation was still ahead of us. The foundation represented Harold Mitchell's vision for sustainable business practices, but implementing that vision would require convincing Bob and Michael to fundamentally reconsider their approach to commercial development. The potential for additional inheritance provided financial incentive, but lasting change would require genuine commitment to values they'd previously dismissed as impractical idealism. The weeks following the will reading transformed the Mitchell family dynamics in ways that none of us could have anticipated. Bob approached me 3 days after our meeting at Wellington Associates, arriving at my Lincoln Park apartment with a briefcase full of Mitchell Properties and Development financial reports and a humility I'd never witnessed from him before. "Sarah, I need to understand what grandfather saw that I missed," he said, settling into my modest living room with documents spread across my coffee table. "These social impact investments you've been managing, how do they actually work? How do you balance profit with community benefit without sacrificing returns?" The conversation that followed lasted 4 hours and covered everything from affordable housing financing structures to local hiring tax incentives. Bob listened with the focused attention of someone genuinely trying to understand concepts that challenged his fundamental assumptions about business strategy. He asked detailed questions about regulatory compliance, community partnership protocols, and performance measurement criteria. What surprised me most was his willingness to admit knowledge gaps rather than defending existing practices. When I explained how community land trusts could provide affordable housing while generating consistent rental income, he acknowledged that he'd never considered such arrangements. When I showed him employment data demonstrating how local hiring reduced training costs while improving customer service ratings, he admitted that Mitchell Properties had been overlooking significant profit opportunities. "Your grandfather was right about something," Bob said as our conversation wound down. "I've been so focused on maximizing short-term profits that I haven't been thinking strategically about long-term sustainability. These community partnerships you're describing, they're not charity. They're smart business." The admission represented a fundamental shift in how Bob understood successful commercial development. For the first time, he was viewing social responsibility as competitive advantage rather than regulatory burden, recognizing that community-focused practices could enhance profitability rather than diminish it. Michael's transformation proved even more dramatic. His background in investment banking had given him sophisticated understanding of complex financial instruments, and he grasped the mathematics of social impact investing almost immediately. 2 weeks after the will reading, he requested permission to attend foundation board meetings as an observer, eager to learn implementation strategies he could apply to his own investment portfolios. "Sarah, I've been running calculations on the housing projects you showed me," he said during one of our newly regular coffee meetings. "The returns are outstanding, but more importantly, the risk profiles are actually lower than traditional real estate investments because of the community support and regulatory backing." His enthusiasm was infectious and completely genuine. Michael had discovered that social impact investing aligned with his analytical nature while satisfying values he'd never previously had opportunity to express through his professional work. He began researching sustainable development projects independently, identifying opportunities that met both foundation criteria and his personal investment standards. The most significant change involved Mitchell Properties and Development's operational philosophy. Bob and Michael proposed restructuring their entire business model around social impact principles, not just to qualify for foundation bonuses but because they'd become convinced that community-focused development represented the future of profitable real estate investment. Their first collaborative project involved converting 3 abandoned buildings in Bronzeville into mixed-income housing that would provide affordable units for local families while generating premium rental income from market-rate apartments. The financing structure combined foundation investment with traditional bank loans and city development incentives, creating a model that could be replicated throughout Chicago's underserved neighborhoods. "We're not doing this because grandfather's will requires it," Bob explained during a family dinner 6 months after the will reading. "We're doing it because Sarah proved that this approach makes better business sense than what we were doing before." The admission meant everything to me, not because it validated my work, but because it demonstrated that Harold Mitchell's vision was becoming family legacy rather than individual mandate. Bob and Michael weren't just implementing social impact strategies to access additional inheritance, they were embracing these approaches because they'd recognized their superior long-term profitability. Linda's adjustment proved more emotional but equally meaningful. She'd spent years worrying about my financial security and professional prospects, and discovering that I'd been successfully managing multi-million-dollar portfolios required complete recalibration of her maternal concerns. "I feel foolish for worrying about you all these years," she said during one of our weekly lunch meetings that had replaced the awkward family gatherings where nobody knew how to address my supposed career struggles. "You were building exactly the kind of successful career I always wanted for you, and I was too blind to see it." Her regret was genuine but unnecessary. The deception hadn't been my choice, and her concern had always come from love rather than judgment. More importantly, her newfound pride in my accomplishments felt more valuable than any inheritance could have provided. Victoria Ashford's reaction proved the most surprising. Rather than resenting her reduced role in family financial matters, she embraced opportunity to learn about social impact investing and eventually requested a consulting position with the foundation. Her experience managing charitable initiatives provided valuable perspective on community needs assessment and nonprofit partnership protocols. "I've been managing charity for decades," she told me during a foundation planning meeting. "But what you're doing is different. You're proving that helping communities can be profitable business strategy rather than expensive obligation." Her involvement brought credibility and connections that enhanced the foundation's effectiveness significantly. Victoria's relationships with established Chicago nonprofits opened doors that might have remained closed to a new foundation, regardless of its financial resources. The foundation's first year exceeded every performance target we'd established. $27 million in investments generated average returns of 19%, while creating affordable housing for over 400 families, funding small business development programs that created 800 jobs, and supporting educational initiatives that served more than 2,000 students. More importantly, Mitchell Properties and Development successfully transitioned to community-focused development practices that increased their profitability by 32% compared to previous years. Bob and Michael earned their full performance bonuses not because the foundation lowered standards, but because they discovered that social responsibility enhanced rather than hindered their business success. The transformation extended beyond immediate family to influence the broader Chicago development community. Other real estate companies began studying Mitchell Properties' community partnership model, recognizing that social impact strategies offered competitive advantages they couldn't afford to ignore. Harold Mitchell's vision was becoming industry standard rather than family experiment, proving that sustainable business practices represented evolution rather than revolution in commercial development thinking. His final gift to the family wasn't just financial inheritance but intellectual legacy that would influence Chicago's development landscape for decades. 2 years after grandfather's death, I stood before the Chicago City Council presenting the foundation's annual impact report. The presentation covered housing developments in 6 neighborhoods, business incubation programs in 4 commercial districts, and educational partnerships with 12 public schools. The financial results spoke for themselves: over $60 million invested, average returns of 18.7%, and measurable community improvements that enhanced property values throughout the target areas. But the most meaningful moment came when Bob stood to address the council after my presentation concluded. 2 years ago, my daughter taught me that social responsibility isn't charity disguised as business, he said. It's business strategy that recognizes community health as essential to long-term profitability. My father understood this before any of us did, and I'm grateful he found a way to teach it to the rest of our family. The acknowledgement represented complete vindication of grandfather's approach to estate planning and family education. Harold Mitchell hadn't just redistributed his wealth, he'd used inheritance structure to transform family values and business practices in ways that voluntary persuasion never could have achieved. After the city council meeting, our family gathered for dinner at the same Drake Hotel where we'd held grandfather's memorial reception. The conversation focused on upcoming foundation projects and Mitchell Properties expansion plans, with everyone contributing ideas about community partnership opportunities and sustainable development strategies. Linda raised her wine glass for a toast that captured the evening's significance. To Harold Mitchell, who saw potential in his granddaughter that the rest of us were too stubborn to recognize. And to Sarah, who proved that empty hands can hold more than we ever imagined. The toast brought tears to my eyes, not because of the recognition but because of the family unity that had emerged from years of misunderstanding and separation. Harold Mitchell's final lesson hadn't just been about business strategy or social responsibility, it had been about the importance of looking beyond surface appearances to recognize hidden strengths and unspoken capabilities. Michael added his own reflection as we finished dessert. Grandfather didn't just leave Sarah money, he left her the opportunity to show us who she really was. And she used that opportunity to teach us who we could become. The observation captured something essential about inheritance that extended beyond financial transfer. True legacy involved passing along values and vision rather than simply redistributing assets from one generation to the next. Harold Mitchell had structured his estate to ensure that Mitchell family wealth would serve purposes larger than individual enrichment. As we walked out of the Drake Hotel into the Chicago evening, Bob fell into step beside me. "Sarah, I have a confession to make. I've been prouder of you this past year than I ever was of my own business accomplishments. What you've built with the foundation, it's bigger than anything I ever achieved." His words meant more than any amount of money could have provided. For 36 years, I'd lived with the knowledge that my father viewed my choices as disappointments rather than decisions. His newfound respect felt like sunlight after decades of shadow, validation that my path had been worthwhile even when it appeared to lead nowhere. 6 months later, I received a call from Elena Rodriguez, my former Northwestern professor, whose contemporary social issues class had started my journey towards social impact investing. She'd been following the foundation's work through academic publications and wanted to invite me to speak at the university's business school about sustainable enterprise strategies. "Your foundation has become a case study in how social responsibility can enhance rather than limit business profitability," she explained. "We're teaching your model to students who will be tomorrow's business leaders." The invitation represented full-circle completion of an educational journey that had begun with curiosity about corporate social responsibility and evolved into practical demonstration of sustainable business practices. Speaking to Northwestern students would provide opportunity to share lessons that might influence another generation of entrepreneurs and investors. The presentation went better than I'd hoped, with students asking sophisticated questions about financing structures, community partnership protocols, and performance measurement criteria. Their enthusiasm reminded me of my own excitement when I'd first discovered that business success and social responsibility could be complementary rather than competing objectives. After the presentation, a young woman approached me with questions that sounded familiar. "Professor Mitchell, I'm researching affordable housing development for my senior thesis. Do you think it's possible to create housing that's both profitable for developers and accessible to moderate-income families?" Her question was almost identical to ones I'd asked Professor Rodriguez 15 years earlier, demonstrating that each generation of students discovered similar tensions between profit and purpose in contemporary business education. My answer drew on everything grandfather and I had learned together about balancing financial returns with community impact. It's not only possible, I told her, it's more profitable than traditional development when you factor in long-term sustainability and community support. The key is viewing social responsibility as competitive advantage rather than regulatory burden. 6 months after my Northwestern presentation, the Mitchell Community Impact Foundation received the Chicago Business Journal's Nonprofit Excellence Award for innovative approaches to community development financing. The recognition came with substantial media coverage that brought national attention to social impact investing strategies we'd developed. More importantly, the award ceremony provided opportunity for family celebration that acknowledged how completely our relationships had transformed since grandfather's death. Bob, Linda, Michael, and Victoria all attended the ceremony, beaming with pride as I accepted recognition for work they finally understood and appreciated. During my acceptance speech, I shared the lesson that Harold Mitchell had taught through his unconventional estate planning. Sometimes the people who appear to have empty hands are actually carrying the most valuable gifts. Sometimes the family members who seem lost are actually finding paths that others haven't recognized yet. And sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't money, but the opportunity to prove what we're truly capable of achieving. The words captured everything that had happened since that December morning when James Wellington revealed grandfather's final wishes. Empty hands had been revealed as carefully concealed full ones, and a family that had been separated by misunderstanding had been reunited by truth that couldn't remain hidden forever. Today, 3 years after grandfather's death, the Mitchell Community Impact Foundation manages over $90 million in assets and has generated measurable community improvements throughout the Midwest region. Mitchell Properties and Development has become Chicago's leading sustainable development company, proving that social responsibility enhances rather than limits business profitability. But the most important transformation involves our family relationships. Tuesday coffee meetings have resumed, with Bob, Michael, and I gathering weekly to discuss foundation projects and development opportunities. Linda joins us monthly, contributing insights about community needs assessment that enhance our project selection criteria. We're no longer the family that dismisses unconventional choices or assumes that different means deficient. We've learned to look beyond surface appearances to recognize hidden strengths and unspoken capabilities. Most importantly, we've discovered that true success involves using whatever talents we possess to create positive impact rather than simply accumulating personal wealth. Harold Mitchell's final lesson continues to influence everything we do. Empty hands can hold gifts that aren't immediately visible. Quiet voices sometimes carry the most important messages. And families that take time to truly see each other can discover strengths they never knew existed. If this story resonates with you, remember that appearances don't always reflect reality. The people who seem to have the least might actually be carrying the most. Look beyond surface judgments to recognize hidden capabilities in the people around you. And trust that truth has a way of emerging when the time is right, transforming relationships and revealing gifts that seemed invisible until someone finally took the time to really see them. 5 years have passed since that transformative December morning at Wellington Associates, and the ripple effects of Harold Mitchell's final wishes continue to reshape not only our family but the entire landscape of Chicago's development community. The Mitchell Community Impact Foundation now operates from a gleaming office tower in the Loop, managing assets that have grown to over $150 million through strategic reinvestment and continued family contributions. The foundation's success has attracted attention from institutional investors nationwide who want to replicate our model in their own cities. Last month I received calls from development groups in Detroit, Cleveland, and Milwaukee asking for consulting services to establish similar social impact investment programs. The approach that grandfather and I developed during our Tuesday coffee meetings has evolved into a nationally recognized framework for sustainable community development, but the most profound changes have occurred within our family structure itself. Bob retired from day-to-day operations at Mitchell Properties and Development last year, transitioning leadership responsibilities to Michael while maintaining an advisory role that allows him to focus on foundation board duties. His retirement speech at the company's annual celebration captured the transformation that grandfather's will had catalyzed. 20 years ago, I measured success by profit margins and property values, Bob told the assembled employees and community partners. My daughter taught me that real success means building communities where families can thrive for generations. Mitchell Properties doesn't just develop real estate anymore, we develop hope, opportunity, and sustainable prosperity for everyone who lives and works in our projects. The speech received a standing ovation from an audience that included residents from affordable housing developments, small business owners who'd received foundation funding, and students from educational programs that Mitchell Properties now sponsors in every neighborhood where we operate. Bob's words reflected genuine conviction rather than corporate public relations, demonstrating how completely his understanding of successful business practices had evolved. Michael's leadership of Mitchell Properties has exceeded everyone's expectations, including his own. His background in investment banking provided sophisticated understanding of complex financing structures, but his enthusiasm for social impact strategies has transformed him into one of Chicago's most innovative developers. Under his guidance, the company has pioneered mixed-use developments that combine affordable housing, commercial space for local entrepreneurs, and community services in integrated projects that strengthen entire neighborhoods. His latest project involves converting a former manufacturing facility in Pilsen into a multi-generational housing complex that includes units for seniors, young families, and college students, along with shared spaces for community events and business incubation programs. The financing structure combines foundation investment with city development funds and private sector partnerships, creating a model that other cities are studying for replication. Sarah showed me that social responsibility isn't a constraint on business success, Michael explained during a recent interview with Chicago Business Journal. It's a catalyst for innovation that opens opportunities we never would have discovered through traditional development approaches. His transformation from skeptical younger brother to passionate advocate for community-focused business practices represents everything that grandfather hoped to achieve through his unconventional estate planning. Michael didn't just inherit money, he inherited purpose that has made his professional life more meaningful than simple profit accumulation ever could have provided. Linda has become the foundation's unofficial community liaison, using her social connections and natural empathy to build relationships with neighborhood groups and nonprofit organizations throughout Chicago. Her role emerged organically as she attended foundation events and discovered how much she enjoyed connecting with families who'd benefited from our housing programs and educational initiatives. I spent decades attending charity galas where wealthy people wrote checks to feel good about themselves, Linda told me during one of our monthly lunches. But what you've created is different. The foundation doesn't just give money away, it invests in solutions that create lasting change while generating returns that fund even more impact. Her involvement has added credibility and warmth to foundation operations that might otherwise feel impersonal despite their community focus. Linda's ability to remember personal details about families we've served and her genuine interest in their ongoing success has created relationships that extend far beyond financial transactions. Victoria Ashford has evolved from family friend to foundation senior advisor, bringing decades of nonprofit management experience to our strategic planning and community partnership development. Her transition from traditional charity work to social impact investing mirrors the broader shift occurring throughout Chicago's philanthropic community. The foundation represents the future of charitable giving, Victoria explained during a recent presentation to the Chicago Community Trust. Instead of perpetual dependence on donor generosity, social impact investing creates sustainable solutions that become self-funding over time. Her expertise has been particularly valuable in developing partnerships with established nonprofits who initially viewed the foundation with suspicion, wondering whether profit-focused community development could truly serve low-income families effectively. Victoria's reputation and connections helped bridge the gap between traditional charity and innovative social enterprise. The foundation's educational initiatives have become my personal passion project, expanding far beyond the basic scholarship programs that most family foundations typically fund. We've partnered with Chicago Public Schools to create entrepreneurship academies in neighborhoods where foundation housing developments operate, teaching high school students business skills while connecting them with local entrepreneurs who can provide mentorship and internship opportunities. These programs address a fundamental challenge that traditional education doesn't solve: how to prepare young people for economic opportunities that may not exist in their communities without creating pathways for them to build those opportunities themselves. Students learn financial literacy, business planning, and marketing strategy while developing real enterprises that serve neighborhood needs. One of our most successful programs operates in Bronzeville, where high school students have launched everything from urban farming cooperatives to technology repair services that generate revenue while addressing community needs. The program's success has attracted attention from education reformers who recognize that entrepreneurship education can provide economic mobility opportunities that traditional academic preparation alone cannot offer. These kids aren't just learning about business, explained Maria Gonzalez, the program coordinator we hired from a local community college. They're solving real problems in their neighborhoods while building skills that will serve them whether they choose college, trade school, or immediate entrepreneurship after graduation. The program's impact extends beyond individual student success to community economic development that creates opportunities for families who might otherwise be displaced by rising property values that typically accompany neighborhood improvement. By training local young people to start businesses that serve local needs, we're building economic ecosystems that benefit long-term residents rather than just newcomers. My personal life has also been transformed by the foundation's success and the family relationships that grandfathers will ultimately repair. 3 years ago, I met David Chen at a sustainable development conference in San Francisco where I was presenting the foundation's model to West Coast investors. David manages a similar social impact fund focused on affordable housing development, and our professional collaboration gradually evolved into personal partnership. David brings perspectives that complement and challenge my approach to community development. His background includes direct experience with housing displacement in San Francisco's rapidly changing neighborhoods, giving him intimate understanding of how well-intentioned development can sometimes harm the very communities it's designed to help. The foundation's success in Chicago proves that social impact investing can work, David told me during a recent visit to review our latest housing projects. But replicating this model in other cities requires understanding local dynamics that might be very different from what works here. His insights have been invaluable as the foundation expands beyond Chicago into other Midwest cities where economic conditions and community needs vary significantly. What works in neighborhoods recovering from industrial decline might not work in rural communities facing agricultural transition or smaller cities dealing with population loss. Last month, David proposed marriage during a foundation board meeting, presenting an engagement ring along with a detailed proposal for merging our two organizations into a national social impact investment platform. His timing was perfect and perfectly characteristic of someone who'd fallen in love with both me and the work we're doing together. Sarah Mitchell, he said, interrupting my presentation about quarterly investment returns, will you marry me and help me prove that social impact investing can transform communities from Chicago to San Francisco and everywhere in between? The board members erupted in applause as I said yes, not just to marriage but to the expanded vision that David was proposing. Our partnership represents both personal happiness and professional opportunity to scale social impact strategies that grandfather and I developed during our Tuesday coffee meetings. The wedding is planned for next spring at the Drake Hotel, the same venue where we held grandfather's memorial reception 6 years ago. The symbolism feels appropriate, celebrating new beginnings in the place where we mourned his passing while honoring the legacy that his final wishes created. Bob will walk me down the aisle, a privilege that feels more meaningful because of how our relationship has evolved since that December morning when empty hands were revealed as carefully concealed full ones. Linda is coordinating reception details with the enthusiasm she once reserved for charity galas, but this celebration will include foundation beneficiaries, alongside family, friends, and business colleagues. Michael will serve as master of ceremonies, sharing stories about family transformation that he's uniquely positioned to tell. His speech will capture the journey from skepticism to embrace that characterized our entire family's response to grandfather's social impact vision. The Foundation's work continues to expand in ways that exceed even Harold Mitchell's ambitious expectations. Recent projects include a partnership with the University of Chicago to create affordable faculty housing that's helping the university attract diverse talent while strengthening relationships with surrounding communities that have historically been excluded from university prosperity. We've also launched a small business incubator program that provides below-market rate commercial space for entrepreneurs in neighborhoods where Foundation housing developments operate. The program creates economic opportunities for residents while generating rental income that funds additional affordable housing development. These initiatives demonstrate the interconnected nature of community development challenges and solutions. Affordable housing alone doesn't create thriving neighborhoods without employment opportunities, educational resources, and commercial services that meet daily needs. The Foundation's integrated approach addresses multiple community needs simultaneously while creating financial returns that sustain ongoing operations. Our success has attracted criticism from some quarters, particularly from traditional developers, who argue that profit-focused community development creates unrealistic expectations about market-rate housing costs. These critics suggest that Foundation-subsidized housing artificially depresses rental prices in ways that discourage private investment in affordable units. The criticism misunderstands our model, which doesn't rely on ongoing subsidies, but rather uses strategic initial investment to create economically sustainable affordable housing that remains accessible without perpetual Foundation support. Our developments prove that community-focused housing can be profitable for developers while remaining affordable for residents. More substantive criticism comes from community activists who worry that any profit-focused development, regardless of social impact intentions, inevitably leads to displacement of existing residents through gentrification pressures. These concerns require careful attention and ongoing dialogue with neighborhood groups about how to balance community improvement with residential stability. The Foundation's success is undeniable, acknowledged Rosa Martinez, director of a local tenant rights organization, during a recent community meeting. But success for developers and success for residents aren't always the same thing. We need ongoing accountability to ensure that profit motives don't eventually override community commitments. Her concerns are legitimate and reflect broader tensions within community development work that no single organization can resolve completely. The Foundation's approach includes binding legal agreements that guarantee affordable housing preservation for decades, but market pressures and political changes could still threaten these commitments over time. Addressing these concerns requires transparent community engagement and flexible program design that can adapt to changing neighborhood conditions without abandoning core social impact objectives. The Foundation's community advisory boards include residents from every development we've funded, ensuring that beneficiary voices influence ongoing policy decisions. The national attention that our model has received has created opportunities and responsibilities that extend far beyond Chicago's boundaries. Federal housing officials have consulted with Foundation staff about incorporating social impact strategies into national affordable housing programs. Urban planning schools invite me to speak about sustainable development financing that could transform how cities approach community development challenges. These speaking engagements provide platforms to share lessons that grandfather and I learned together, but they also require careful consideration of how local success can translate to different contexts without losing essential elements that make social impact investing effective. Every community has unique characteristics that require customized approaches, I explained during a recent presentation to the National Association of Housing and Redevelopment Officials. But the core principle remains constant: sustainable community development requires business strategies that view resident prosperity as essential to investor returns. The principle sounds simple but represents fundamental departure from traditional development practices that maximize short-term profits without considering long-term community sustainability. Implementation requires sophisticated understanding of local markets, community needs, and regulatory environments that vary significantly across different cities and regions. As I reflect on the journey from that December morning when my empty hands were revealed as carefully concealed full ones, I'm struck by how completely grandfather's final lesson continues to unfold. Harold Mitchell didn't just redistribute his wealth or even transform his family's understanding of successful business practices. He demonstrated that apparent failures can conceal hidden successes, that quiet voices sometimes carry the most important messages, and that patient investment in people and communities generates returns that purely financial strategies cannot match. The foundation that bears his name has become more than charitable organization or investment fund. It represents proof that business success and social responsibility can be complementary rather than competing objectives, that profit and purpose can be pursued simultaneously without compromising either goal. But perhaps most importantly, the foundation embodies the lesson that families who take time to truly see each other can discover strengths they never knew existed. Empty hands can hold gifts that aren't immediately visible. Dismissive judgments can give way to respectful recognition when truth finally has room to emerge. Harold Mitchell's greatest legacy isn't the money he left or even the communities that foundation investments have strengthened. His greatest legacy is the family unity that emerged from years of misunderstanding, the professional collaboration that replaced generational conflict, and the shared purpose that transformed individual inheritance into collective commitment to creating positive change. Today, as I prepare for marriage to David and expansion of social impact investing beyond Chicago's boundaries, I carry forward not just grandfather's financial legacy, but his deeper lesson about the importance of looking beyond surface appearances to recognize hidden potential in people and communities that others might dismiss too quickly. The empty hands that my family once mocked have indeed been revealed as full ones, but they're full of more than money. They're full of purpose, partnership, and proof that patient investment in people and communities generates the kind of returns that make every sacrifice worthwhile. 10 years have elapsed since James Wellington first read Harold Mitchell's will in that mahogany-paneled conference room, and the transformation that began that December morning has rippled outward in ways that none of us could have anticipated. The Mitchell Community Impact Foundation has evolved from a family inheritance dispute into a nationally recognized model for sustainable community development, managing assets approaching $300 million across 7 Midwest cities. The foundation's Chicago headquarters now occupies 3 floors of a renovated historic building in the South Loop, a structure that itself represents our approach to development. Instead of demolishing the century-old warehouse, we partnered with local craftspeople to preserve its architectural character while creating modern office space, affordable artist studios, and ground-floor retail opportunities for neighborhood entrepreneurs. David and I celebrated our 5th wedding anniversary last month with a trip to Copenhagen, where we studied Danish approaches to social housing that might inform our expanding operations. Our marriage has become both personal partnership and professional collaboration, with David's West Coast perspective balancing my Midwest sensibilities as we work to establish social impact investment programs in cities from Seattle to Miami. Our 3-year-old daughter, Emma, accompanies us to many foundation events, absorbing lessons about community engagement and social responsibility that I hope will influence her own understanding of purpose and privilege. She's already showing signs of the curiosity and empathy that characterized my own childhood interests, asking thoughtful questions about why some families have big houses while others live in apartments. "Mama, why do we give money to help people build homes?" Emma asked during a recent site visit to a foundation housing development in Pilsen. Her question prompted reflection about how to explain complex social issues to a young child without overwhelming her with problems she's too young to understand completely. Because everyone deserves a safe place to live, I explained, and sometimes people need help making that happen. When we help families find good homes, we're building stronger neighborhoods for everyone. Her follow-up questions demonstrated the natural justice instincts that children possess before social conditioning teaches them to accept inequality as inevitable. Emma's perspective reminds me daily that the work we're doing isn't just about financial returns or community development statistics, it's about creating the kind of world where her generation can thrive alongside children from every background and economic circumstance. Bob's transition from skeptical father to foundation board chair has been one of the most remarkable aspects of our family's evolution. Now 72, he brings decades of real estate experience to strategic planning while demonstrating enthusiasm for community engagement that surprises longtime business associates who remember his previous focus on profit maximization. His involvement extends beyond board meetings to hands-on participation in community events and resident engagement sessions that inform foundation policy decisions. Last month, Bob spent an entire Saturday helping families move into a new affordable housing complex in Bronzeville, carrying boxes and assembling furniture with the energy of someone half his age. "I never understood how rewarding this work could be," Bob told a reporter from Crane's Chicago Business, who was covering the foundation's 10-year anniversary. "Making money is satisfying, but making a difference in people's lives is something entirely different. Sarah taught me that the two don't have to be mutually exclusive." His transformation has influenced other Chicago developers who've watched Mitchell Properties thrive while implementing community-focused practices that many traditional firms still consider economically risky. Bob's advocacy for social impact strategies within industry organizations has helped legitimize approaches that might otherwise be dismissed as idealistic charity disguised as business. Michael's leadership of Mitchell Properties has positioned the company as Chicago's premier sustainable development firm, with projects in dozens of neighborhoods that combine affordable housing, commercial space, and community services in integrated developments that strengthen entire areas rather than just individual properties. His latest achievement involves a partnership with the Chicago Transit Authority to create mixed-income housing around elevated train stations, improving public transportation access while generating revenue that funds additional affordable housing development. The project required complex negotiations with community groups, city officials, and private investors, but the results demonstrate how strategic public-private partnerships can address multiple urban challenges simultaneously. "The foundation taught me that successful development requires thinking beyond individual projects to consider neighborhood-level impact," Michael explained during a recent presentation to the Urban Land Institute. "When you design developments that strengthen communities, you create long-term value that benefits everyone involved." His expertise has attracted consulting requests from developers across the country who want to implement similar community-focused strategies in their own markets. Michael's willingness to share knowledge freely reflects the collaborative approach that characterizes all foundation operations, recognizing that social impact grows through replication rather than competition. Linda's role as Foundation Community Liaison has evolved into a full-time position that utilizes her natural empathy and social connections to build relationships with families, neighborhood groups, and nonprofit organizations throughout our service areas. Her work bridges the gap between foundation leadership and community residents, ensuring that beneficiary voices influence policy decisions at every level. Her annual community appreciation events have become neighborhood celebrations that bring together residents from different foundation developments, creating social connections that extend beyond individual housing complexes. These gatherings demonstrate how affordable housing can build community rather than simply providing individual family shelter. Mrs. Mitchell makes everyone feel valued and heard, explained Carmen Rodriguez, a single mother who moved into foundation housing 3 years ago and now serves on the Resident Advisory Council. She remembers everyone's names and always asks about our children and our dreams for the future. Linda's approach reflects understanding that successful community development requires personal relationships rather than just financial transactions. Her ability to connect with families from backgrounds very different from her own has created trust that enables honest dialogue about program effectiveness and needed improvements. Victoria Ashford's evolution from family friend to foundation senior advisor has brought institutional memory and nonprofit expertise that has strengthened every aspect of our operations. Her decades of experience managing charitable organizations provided crucial guidance during our early years, when enthusiasm sometimes outpaced practical knowledge about community development complexities. Her current focus involves developing partnerships with universities and research institutions that can provide data analysis and program evaluation services to document foundation impact objectively. These partnerships ensure that our success claims are supported by rigorous evidence rather than anecdotal stories, however compelling those stories might be. The Foundation's approach represents the future of philanthropic investment, Victoria explained during a recent panel discussion at the Association of Fundraising Professionals Conference. By generating financial returns while creating social impact, we've developed a sustainable model that doesn't depend on ongoing donor generosity. Her advocacy within Chicago's philanthropic community has influenced other foundations to consider social impact investing strategies that could multiply their community development impact significantly. Victoria's reputation and relationships have opened doors that might otherwise remain closed to newer organizations, regardless of their financial resources or community effectiveness. The Foundation's educational programs have expanded beyond entrepreneurship academies to include college preparation services, trade school partnerships, and adult education opportunities that serve families across multiple generations. Our holistic approach recognizes that sustainable community development requires addressing educational needs from early childhood through adult career transitions. One of our most innovative programs involves partnerships with community colleges to offer construction and property management training that prepares local residents for employment in foundation housing developments. Graduates receive guaranteed job opportunities while developments benefit from employees who understand and are committed to community-focused property management approaches. This program changed my entire life trajectory, explained Marcus Johnson, who completed construction training 2 years ago and now supervises maintenance operations at 4 foundation properties. Before this opportunity, I was working temporary jobs without any career prospects. Now I have skills, steady income, and the satisfaction of maintaining homes for families in my own neighborhood. The program's success has attracted attention from workforce development agencies that recognize how targeted job training can address both individual employment needs and community development goals simultaneously. Other foundations are studying our model for replication in cities where affordable housing development faces similar skilled labor shortages. Our small business incubator programs have launched over 200 enterprises during the past decade, ranging from neighborhood restaurants to technology startups that serve local markets while contributing to broader economic development. These businesses create employment opportunities for residents while generating commercial activity that makes neighborhoods more attractive to additional investment. The incubator success stories include everything from urban farming cooperatives that supply fresh produce to local restaurants to home healthcare agencies that serve aging residents who want to remain in their communities. Each business addresses specific neighborhood needs while contributing to economic ecosystems that support long-term community sustainability. The foundation didn't just give me money to start my business, explained Angela Williams, whose catering company now employs 12 people and serves events throughout Chicago. They provided mentorship, business training, and connections that helped me build something sustainable rather than just getting by. The comprehensive support approach reflects understanding that successful entrepreneurship requires more than initial capital, particularly for first-time business owners who may lack experience with financial management, marketing, and regulatory compliance. Our programs address these knowledge gaps while building networks that connect new entrepreneurs with established business owners who can provide ongoing guidance. The Foundation's expansion beyond Chicago has required careful adaptation of our model to different economic conditions and community characteristics in cities from Milwaukee to St. Louis. Each new location demands extensive research and community engagement to understand local needs and develop programs that serve those needs effectively. Our Detroit operations focus heavily on vacant property rehabilitation that transforms abandoned buildings into affordable housing while stabilizing neighborhoods that have struggled with population loss and disinvestment. The approach requires different financing structures and community partnerships than our Chicago work, but the core principles remain consistent. Detroit's challenges are different from Chicago's, but the Foundation's approach of combining profit with purpose works here too, explained Keisha Thompson, who directs our Detroit office. We're proving that social impact investing can revitalize communities that other developers have written off as unprofitable. The Detroit success has attracted attention from federal housing officials who are studying our model for potential incorporation into national urban renewal programs. Our ability to generate positive financial returns while improving distressed neighborhoods demonstrates that social impact strategies can work even in markets that traditional developers consider too risky for investment. Our Cleveland operations focus on intergenerational housing that keeps extended families connected while providing affordable options for seniors, young adults, and families with children. The approach addresses demographic changes that have left many neighborhoods with housing stock that doesn't match current resident needs. These projects require sophisticated understanding of zoning regulations, accessibility requirements, and community preferences that vary significantly from neighborhood to neighborhood. Our success depends on extensive consultation with residents, community organizations, and local officials who understand specific area characteristics better than outside developers could learn through market research alone. The national recognition that our model has received includes invitations to testify before congressional committees studying affordable housing policy and urban development strategies. These opportunities provide platforms to advocate for federal policies that could scale social impact investing approaches nationwide, but they also require careful balance between promoting our model and acknowledging that no single approach can address the full complexity of American housing challenges. The Mitchell Foundation demonstrates that private investment can create affordable housing without perpetual government subsidies. I explained during recent testimony before the House Financial Services Committee. But replicating this model requires policy changes that make social impact investing more attractive to traditional investors who currently focus on short-term returns. The policy recommendations include tax incentives for long-term affordable housing investment, regulatory streamlining that reduces development costs, and public-private partnership frameworks that combine government resources with private sector efficiency. These changes could multiply social impact investment effectiveness while reducing public expenditures on housing assistance programs. My role as Foundation President has evolved to include increasing responsibilities for industry leadership and policy advocacy that extend far beyond day-to-day operations management. Speaking engagements at universities, conferences, and policy forums provide opportunities to share lessons learned while learning from other practitioners who are developing similar approaches in different contexts. The most meaningful aspect of this broader engagement involves mentoring young professionals who are interested in social impact careers but uncertain about how to combine idealistic goals with practical financial realities. Their questions often echo my own uncertainties from 20 years ago when I was struggling to understand how business success and social responsibility could be pursued simultaneously. Is it really possible to make good money while doing good work? asked Jessica Chen, a recent MBA graduate who attended one of my presentations at Northwestern's Kellogg School of Management. Her question captured the fundamental tension that many young professionals face when choosing between lucrative traditional careers and meaningful but potentially lower-paying social impact work. The foundation proves that profit and purpose aren't opposing forces, I explained, but combining them successfully requires patience, persistence, and willingness to learn from mistakes that will inevitably occur along the way. These conversations remind me that grandfather's legacy extends beyond our family and the communities where foundation investments have created positive change. His vision of business as a tool for community improvement continues to influence new generations of entrepreneurs and investors who are developing innovative approaches to social and environmental challenges. David's expansion of social impact investing to the West Coast has created opportunities for cross-regional collaboration and knowledge sharing that strengthen both organizations. Our marriage has facilitated professional partnerships that might not have developed otherwise, demonstrating how personal relationships can enhance rather than complicate business collaboration. Our joint projects include a housing development in Oakland that combines foundation financing with David's organization's expertise in earthquake-resistant construction techniques. The collaboration has produced innovative building designs that provide affordable housing while meeting California's stringent seismic safety requirements. Working with Sarah has taught me that social impact investing works best when organizations share knowledge freely rather than competing for resources. David explained during a recent interview with Stanford Social Innovation Review, collaboration multiplies impact in ways that individual organizational success cannot achieve. Our partnership has also facilitated expansion into markets where neither organization could have succeeded independently. Joint ventures in Denver and Portland have demonstrated that social impact strategies can work in rapidly growing cities where housing costs are rising faster than local incomes can support. Emma's presence at foundation events has become a natural part of our family routine, with her questions and observations often providing fresh perspectives on programs that adults might take for granted. Her innocence and curiosity remind everyone that community development work ultimately aims to create better opportunities for the next generation. Daddy, why do some kids have to move schools when their families can't pay rent? Emma asked during a recent conversation about housing stability and educational outcomes. Her question prompted reflection about how housing instability affects children's academic achievement and social development in ways that extend far beyond immediate shelter needs. These family conversations about social justice and community responsibility help Emma develop empathy and understanding that will influence her own life choices, whether or not she chooses to work in community development professionally. Her early exposure to diverse communities and social issues provides foundation for lifelong commitment to creating positive change. As I reflect on the decade that has passed since grandfather's will first revealed my empty hands as carefully concealed full ones, I'm struck by how completely his final lesson continues to unfold. Harold Mitchell's vision of business as community service has influenced not just our family but entire industries that are reconsidering traditional approaches to profit maximization and social responsibility. The foundation's success demonstrates that patient investment in people and communities generates returns that purely financial strategies cannot match. But perhaps more importantly, our work proves that families who take time to truly see each other can discover strengths they never knew existed and create legacies that extend far beyond individual achievement. Harold Mitchell's greatest gift wasn't money, but perspective that transformed dismissive judgments into respectful recognition, individual inheritance into collective commitment to positive change, and apparent failure into revealed success that continues to grow with each passing year. The empty hands that once carried only disappointment now hold purpose, partnership, and proof that quiet persistence can create transformations that reshape families, communities, and entire approaches to business success. Grandfather's final lesson continues to teach new generations that true wealth involves building prosperity that everyone can share. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.